Shadow Hack. Chapter 541, The Appearance of an Enormous Egg. Good, now pour the giant beast blood and fill the pond. Following the commands of God Flowing Wind, the several hundred ape gods began to pour down giant beast blood into the recently excavated pond. Soon, the more than 10-meter wide hole was filled with giant beast blood. When Li Yunmu saw this scene, he felt greatly distressed. After all, he had collected the enormous amount of giant beast blood by secretly letting out the shadows into the wilderness so they could kill numerous monsters every evening in the past few days. There had met with ordinary beasts, vicious beasts, giant beasts, devil beasts. In terms of human strength classification, they were comparable to physical flux experts, great flux experts, and sage flux experts. Before Li Yunmu's strength had advanced to the great flux expert realm, his shadows had been unable of killing the giant beasts with their strength. Right now though, a third of his entire giant beast blood supply was poured out because of one casual sentence from God Flowing Wind. When the pond was filled and the 8 devil beast cores were set in their locations, God Flowing Wind took out the blood of an evolved devil beast and used it to draw some patterns around the blood pond and devil beast cores. In almost a day, the blood-breeding nest from ancient times was shaped. Only then did Li Yunmu have the opportunity to ask his questions. Only an ancient blood-bleeding nest created from such precious ingredients can hatch this spirit-grade beast egg? As a matter of fact, it wasn't a big surprise that Li Yunmu was so confused. Although the spirit-grade beast egg was precious and had cost him 50 million sacred Pangu coins to snatch it away from the hands of the young sound woman, it wasn't that money-eating. When contrasted with the materials used to arrange the blood-breeding nest, the situation became relatively strange. After all, God Flowing Wind had used 8 devil beast cores to create the blood-breeding nest. Although devil beast cores were dead and had far less value in battle when compared to a serpent-type beast with the potential to reach devil beast realm, they were still 8 devil beast cores. If Li Yunmu hadn't robbed Black Spirit Valley's treasury, which contained treasures surpassing his imagination, he wouldn't have been able to kill a single devil beast, let alone speak of obtaining its core. After all, the devil beast level creatures were similar to sages in terms of strength. Moreover, devil beasts who could condense a devil beast core in their body would usually be equivalent to mid-stage sage. It was a known fact that monsters who had recently entered the devil beast realm didn't have the enormous amount of power required to condense their own cores. Moreover, regardless of whether it were land or the more formidable sea devil beasts, their enormous beastly bodies were innately formidable compared to human-shaped creatures. That being said, even if Li Yunmu could fight against a mid-stage sage flux expert, he still wouldn't be certain about being able to kill a devil beast who had condensed a beast core. This was a fact. Because of that, regardless of whether it was the 8 devil beast cores or the large amount of giant beast blood, their value surpassed that of the spirit-grade beast egg. Was it really worth it to not balk at any price to create the blood-breeding nest for the spirit-grade beast egg? Definitely not. Moreover, Li Yunmu knew that hatching a spirit-grade beast egg wasn't such a costly affair. As long as he kept it around and made a mental connection with it, the egg would hatch in time once he dropped his blood on it. However, the so-called spirit-grade beast egg before him couldn't be of spirit grade, otherwise, God Flowing Wind wouldn't have made such a fuss. Li Yunmu had come to understand this, or else he definitely wouldn't have allowed God Flowing Wind to use such precious resources. Alright, it's a success. Now I only need a drop of Master Yunmu's blood, God Flowing Wind said in an expectant voice after finishing his preparations. Without saying a word, Li Yunmu stopped using all the body refining techniques and protective shields and moved the great flux energy in his body. Pop! Li Yunmu was slightly injured and spit out a mouthful of bright red blood on the fist-sized spirit-grade beast egg according to God Flowing Wind's orders. The next instant, God Flowing Wind muttered something and unleashed the blood-breeding nest he'd finished not too long ago. A mystical thing happened at that moment. The fist-sized spirit-grade beast egg seemed to have come alive. It immersed itself within the giant beast blood in the blood pond. While absorbing it, the egg was also taking in the energy offered by the 8 devil beast cores. After absorbing both the beast blood and the devil beast core's energy, the beast egg, which was fist-sized originally, began to grow at a speed which was visible to the naked eye. Boom! It was unfathomable. Li Yunmu's jaw fell down, and he couldn't close it for a long time. The fist-sized beast egg had expanded like a balloon being filled with air in almost no time. It swiftly reached several meter diameter while flickering with multicolored lights. This is the true appearance of the spirit-grade serpent egg. At that instant, Li Yunmu finally understood everything. The multicolored mysterious lights emitted by the enormous beast egg didn't mean that it was a spirit-grade serpent egg, but rather an unknown beast egg of god grade. In other words, once it hatched, the combat pet would have the potential to enter deity realm. The difference between the potential to reach sage realm and deity realm was only of one major realm. But this difference of one realm was like the difference between heaven and earth. When Li Yunmu saw the large egg emit the multicolored light, his breath caught in his throat. Master Yunmu, using 8 devil beast cores for it was worth it, right? God Flowing Wind exposed a hint of a smile while voicing his question. Worth it, more than worth it. My heart ached before, but now I don't regret it at all. Li Yunmu began to laugh happily. It has to be said that it was a great fortune. Everyone, including the heavenly cats who had put it up for auction, had believed that the egg was only a spirit-grade serpent beast egg, so none of them could have expected that it was surprisingly a god-grade beast egg. Based on Li Yunmu's knowledge, only a couple first-tier powers would possess the qualifications to nurture a monster that possessed the strength of ancient devil beasts in the vast origin world. There were ordinary beasts, vicious beasts, giant beasts, devil beasts, ancient devil beasts. Among the life forms of the origin world, ancient devil beasts were considered as the most powerful existences. No one had truly explored the depths of the oceans, which were countless tens of thousands of meters deep, but if they were to do that, they would probably see ancient devil beasts ruling over the deepest abyss of the origin world. Chapter 542, Even Higher Class of Monsters. Li Yunmu finally understood why God Flowing Wind had said that this beast egg could compare with the 12-pattern true armor of the Pangu. After careful comparison, it was clear that the god-grade serpent egg's value and potential were higher compared to those of Pangu true armor. After all, even if Pangu true armor had been congealed by a great circle Pangu sage, it was still a step away from the genuine deity realm. However, Li Yunmu knew well that the reason why the two were of the same value or the egg was even slightly inferior was because of the process and time required for the beast to mature. After all, it was impossible to hope that as soon as the serpent egg hatched, an ancient devil at the deity layer would appear. The unknown serpent-type beast would require time to mature successfully, while Pangu true armor was available right away. As long as one obtained Pangu true armor, they could immediately unleash the abilities of the true armor, which possessed formidable defense and strength. Suddenly, Li Yunmu had a strange idea. Can I refine and assimilate it with the innate expert armor? No, you cannot. You assimilate it with the innate expert armor, this would lock its potential, God Flowing Wind said with a creased brow. His implicit meaning was that the deity-level beast egg could bring his innate expert armor to the next level. But if he refined and assimilated it, then the unknown beast which hadn't hatched yet would be limited while maturing. Li Yunmu was pleasantly surprised and didn't feel much regret. Ka-cha, 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 ka-cha. While Li Yunmu and God Flowing Wind were conversing, the enormous egg had absorbed enough beast blood and energy. Cracks began to appear on its surface. There were more and more of them. Li Yunmu subconsciously looked at it and began to focus on everything that was happening around it. Before long, one corner of the enormous egg, which was several meters in diameter, was blown away by a powerful force from the inside. The next instant, an enormous green-scaled snake crawled out. The snake was as thick as Li Yunmu's arm, and its body was covered in cyan scales which were reflecting light and flickering. Each scale had an incomplete divine rune which had naturally formed there. Cyan-colored scales, Purple pupils, phoenix tail, natural divine runes, this was the life form which had appeared out of the broken shell of the so-called spirit-grade beast egg. If not for God-flowing wind, Li Yunmu would have also missed it. Once the giant cyan snake appeared, it ignored its environment and due to some basic instinct pounced on the enormous carapace to eat the shell. Whenever it swallowed a piece of the eggshell, its body would enlarge by a margin visible to the naked eye. When the entire eggshell had entered its belly in 2 hours, it no longer resembled itself. At this time, what was in front of Li Yunmu couldn't be called a cyan-scaled snake which was only as thick as his arm. After all, it had already become as enormous as a water hose and reached more than 30 meters in length. Li Yunmu hurriedly asked the system to scan the cyan-scaled giant snake. Instantly, he obtained all the data about it from the system. Giant beast grade. It was indeed worthy of being called an ancient devil serpent beast with the potential to reach deity realm. It had barely come into the world and finished eating the egg shell when its strength reached giant beast realm. After the cyan-scaled giant snake finished the egg shell, it immediately crawled towards Li Yunmu at a rapid speed. Its enormous size oozed with some suppressed sensation, and it whistled loudly from the distance while rushing toward Li Yunmu. To Li Yunmu, however, the sound reminded the wailing of a newborn infant toward its parent. Although the snake's size was enormous, making it intimidating, it was a newly born cyan-scaled giant snake. Good, good, good. From now on, I will call you Little Ching. Because of Li Yunmu's heart blood in the blood-breeding nest, a profound connection of familiarity had been established between him and the cyan-scaled snake. Overjoyed, Li Yunmu gave it a name Little Ching. The cyan-scaled snake couldn't understand what it meant for the time being, but because of the mental connection between the two of them, it instinctively realized that Li Yunmu was calling it. Its infant strength was that of giant beast realm. With it, Li Yunmu finally possessed what could be called as his own combat pet. Moreover, it would mature in time and become increasingly more formidable. God-flowing wind, what sort of ancient beast is Little Ching? How could I train it to increase its strength quickly? Li Yunmu leaped on Little Ching's back and mounted him. After sharing his thoughts with Little Ching, he began to tour the heavenly world on a genuine giant snake. Although its speed didn't appear very fast, the number left Li Yunmu completely shocked once the system presented him with the data it had calculated. Its speed was 360 km/h. This, of course, required one to take into consideration that the heavenly world wasn't large enough for Little Ching to display its full speed. Quickly, the system deduced that Little Ching's fastest speed on land would easily cross 1700 km/h. Its average speed was easily 1200 km/h. This average speed left Li Yunmu greatly astonished. It was high enough for Little Ching to be among the fastest life forms in the giant beast realm. It was truly worthy of being a serpent-type creature which possessed the potential to reach ancient devil realm. While testing all sorts of abilities that the young snake possessed, Li Yunmu was also making inquiries about its origin from God-flowing wind. Even the system didn't have any information about a creature with cyan scales, phoenix tail, and divine runes in its database. It was no wonder then that no one in the auction house had discovered the abnormality about Little Ching's serpent egg. Reporting to Master Yunmu, in the ancient times, the majority of people called Little Ching's breed a cyan-feathered giant serpent. Among the majority of deity realm powerhouses, a combat beast pet from this race was considered extremely valuable. It was basically impossible for ordinary deities to catch them. If you could catch them and make them agree to be your combat pet, your strength would rise substantially. The more God-flowing wind shared about cyan-feathered giant serpent, the more Li Yunmu was stunned. The feeling that his 50 million sacred Pangu coins hadn't gone to waste kept growing stronger and stronger within him. Speaking of which, based on God-flowing wind's memories as a fragment of an ancient god's soul, the cyan-feathered giant snake was known to possess ancient devil beast bloodline. The universal limit on its maturation was ancient devil beast grade, but if a deity used their divine power to nourish it, it might ascend to immemorial devil beast. It was the first time Li Yunmu heard about immemorial devil beasts and learned that an even more formidable class of monsters existed in the origin world. Chapter 543, Create Something from Nothing. In terms of human strength, this was almost equivalent to ancient god realm. Humans were separated into physical flux experts, great flux experts, sage flux experts, deities, and ancient gods. When compared to the monster bloodline evolutions, these levels corresponded to ordinary beasts, vicious beasts, giant beasts, devil beasts, ancient devil beasts, and immemorial devil beasts. In other words, if little Ching was nurtured with divine power, her potential could rise to the next layer, which was beyond ancient devil beast realm. But this wasn't even the most important point. When God Flowing Wind explained Cyan Feathered Giant Snake's innate divine ability, Li Yunmu was completely stupefied. Innate divine ability was a new phrase for him. Previously, he hadn't known what sort of ghost such a thing was. During his exchange with the sea breeze whale, he had heard about innate abilities possessed by devil beast grade life forms and had personally experienced their inborn strength. But he had definitely never heard anything about ancient devil beasts, let alone them possessing an innate divine ability. Only ancient devil beasts with the deity realm bloodline could possess an innate divine ability. And little Ching's innate divine ability was morph. Because of it, the ancient gods viewed Cyan Feathered Giant Snakes as evolved ancient devil beasts. The morph ability's existence didn't increase the combat strength of the Cyan Feathered Giant Snake, but the strength of it when the master and the combat pet fought together. From God Flowing Wind's short explanation, the morph ability possessed unlimited possibilities. Former ancient gods had used the Cyan Feathered Giant Snake's morphage ability to change the creature into a weapon. It would be suited to their tastes and would be the most formidable weapon in their possession. Of course, there were ancient gods who used the morphing ability to create all sorts of other objects as well. For example, an arm shield, helmet, or a human-shaped organism to assist in combat. At other times, the snakes were told become cave dwellings or something else that their master needed at that moment. In short, Cyan Feathered Giant Snake's morphing ability was precisely as God Flowing Wind had described it, possessing unlimited possibilities. As long as Li Yunmu properly used this innate divine ability and the Cyan Feathered Giant Snake became his combat pet, it could transform into any weapon he thought would suit him and increase his combat strength. It could also transform into common necessities, thus saving him a lot of trouble. Only when Li Yunmu mentally communicated with little Ching after being reminded by God Flowing Wind that he discovered the scariness of the morph ability. Little Ching, transform into a cave dwelling for me, Li Yunmu instructed little Ching in his mind. He brought the image of the cave dwelling to the front of his mind, and an amazing event occurred the next instant. Once little Ching heard Li Yunmu's request, she hesitated, then the enormous serpent body began to melt. In a short while, the giant snake entrenched in front of Li Yunmu morphed into a small mountain. After another short moment of hesitation, it formed a cave dwelling resembling the one in Li Yunmu's mind. Perhaps because it was little Ching's first time using her visualization ability, there was a lot of hesitation and unfamiliarity in the process. But the fact that she had such an innate divine ability was confirmed. Even if it was little Ching's first time unleashing it, she was still able to do it without any need for guidance. With time, she would only become more proficient in using it. Little Ching's first mimicked form was generated under Li Yunmu's command. It was actually identical to the cave dwelling which Li Yunmu had imagined in his mind. It was a small dwelling concealed within a Cyan mountain. Besides all the residences, gardens, and cultivation chambers, even the storage house, treasury, training rooms, and other things were available. But the mountain cave dwelling was very small, unusually so. It was like a miniature version of what was in Li Yunmu's mind, a lifelike model. This. What is this? How can such a small cave dwelling be useful? When Li Yunmu saw little Ching transform into a thatched cottage-sized mountain, he was dumbstruck. Only if his size was reduced by 100-fold so he was the size of an ant could he properly enjoy the cave dwelling made by little Ching. I forgot to inform Master Yunmu that although cyan-feathered giant snake's innate divine ability allows it to morph into anything, it is not omnipotent. It cannot create something out of nothing, God Flowing Wind said with a smile. Create something out of nothing. That's right, if Master Yunmu wants it to transform into a weapon or even a small cottage, that's fine. Given little Ching's enormous size, the morphed objects would be much stronger compared to genuine weapons and cottages. But if Master Yunmu asks it to transform into something which surpasses its size, the result would be like this. After God Flowing Wind's detailed explanation, Li Yunmu gradually understood the problem. Sure enough, little Ching couldn't just create something out of nothing, its creations had a limit. Regardless of whether little Ching morphed into a cave dwelling or a weapon, her morphing ability was inevitably linked to her density and mass. In other words, little Ching's ability could only be used perfectly when Li Yunmu read of the snake's physical strength and the density of her body. Otherwise, if he blindly asked little Ching to transform into an object which far surpassed her large body size, it would be the same as trying to create something out of nothing. The practical usage of such a thing wouldn't be able to compare with the expected thing. Li Yunmu thought of something, and the next instant he asked little Ching to transform into Li Qinghong's weapon, the frightening imperial spear. Soon, an identical frightening imperial spear was lying in front of Li Yunmu, right under the astonished gaze of Li Qinghong. But the system scan revealed that the difference in the mass of the two spears was like that between heaven and earth. The mass of the frightening imperial spear used by Li Qinghong is 130 kilograms, while the mass of the morphed frightening imperial spear is 69 tons. Li Qinghong's spear has a mass density of 13 while the morphed spear's is 186. When the system carefully scanned the two identical frightening imperial spears and carried out the most detailed analysis to compare them, both Li Yunmu or Li Qinghong found themselves short of breath. Although the frightening imperial spear which little Ching had morphed into was identical to the original, it was only so in appearance. Whether it was in weight or mass density, the disparity between the two was extremely great. Li Qinghong's frightening imperial spear was countless grades lower than the one created by little Ching. Chapter 544, Divine Cyan Sword. After that experiment, Li Yunmu finally understood how the divine ability worked. He also comprehended the most crucial element restricting little Ching's transformations. It was the snake's stature and mass. Although little Ching's frightening imperial spear was identical in size to Li Qinghong's, its inner mass was actually equal to that of the cyan-feathered giant snake, which reached 69 tons. When little Ching, which was the size of a water horse whose length surpassed 30 meters, morphed into a 3-meter-long frightening imperial spear, her total mass wouldn't change. It would only be greatly compressed. The frightening imperial spears weren't directly proportional in anything. Even the density of little Ching's frightening imperial spear was more than 10 times the original one. When the density increased by more than 10 times, the durability, hardness, strength, penetrating power, and endurance of the frightening imperial spear were foreordained to rise substantially as well. The frightening imperial spear in which little Ching had morphed was definitely better by an unknown number of levels compared to Li Qinghong's fifth-dimensional weapon. What did this mean? The frightening imperial spear which Li Yunmu now possessed surpassed a fifth-dimensional treasure weapon and maybe was even more formidable than the seventh-dimensional treasure weapons. This also implied that if little Ching matured to the next step and advanced to become a more formidable devil beast or even an ancient devil beast, the weapon into which it would transform would be even more terrifying, both in terms of its weight and density. It has to be known that she had barely entered giant beast realm, so little Ching's body was only 30 meters long compared to a devil beast with a body of more than 1,000 meters. Not to mention that when little Ching achieved her full potential and joined the ranks of deity-level ancient devil beasts, its body would cross the threshold of 5 kilometers. That would be even more unimaginable. When Li Yunmu thought about a several kilometer-long great snake compressing itself into a several meter-long frightening imperial spear, he couldn't help shuddering. What sort of terrifying strength would such a spear possess? The limitation of Cyan Feathered Great Snake's formidable ability was precisely the upper bound of its stature and weight. All of a sudden, Li Yunmu gained some understanding. At the same time, he finally experienced how heaven-defying were the innate divine abilities of ancient devil beasts. What Li Yunmu lacked at that moment was precisely a weapon. As his strength advanced substantially, the famed Snow Guzzle Cold Thunder Blade which he had used during his time in the fifth dimension had long ago become unable to endure being imbued with his great flux energy. Because of that, he had bestowed that weapon to little lassie Tutu. It wasn't that he was being arrogant, but that his strength had grown to such an extent that the fifth-dimensional treasure weapon couldn't endure it and wouldn't allow him to display his combat strength. This had left Li Yunmu unable to use his violent blade skill for a very long time. A weapon which couldn't take all of his strength would naturally be unable to allow him to display his genuine strength. The formidable might which came from one strike superimposing on the previous one wasn't something which could be neglected. That was why he couldn't unleash his peak strength. The formidable might of each strike superimposing upon the previous one was foreordained to be weakest at the start. If he used it to deal with an enemy weaker than him, it would be fine. However, if he used it on an opponent who was equivalent to him in power or even stronger, he wouldn't have a weapon which could endure his great flux strength of 3,500. Because of that, he'd been unable to fight against people stronger than him. But the situation was no longer the same. And it was all because of little Ching. The next second, Li Yunmu communicated with her, asking her to morph into the Snow Guzzle Cold Thunder Blade. The new blade, however, didn't possess the special characteristic of freezing the opponent, and it also didn't have the property of thunder flux energy. It only had the exterior appearance of Li Yunmu's previous weapon. Its weight now was 69 tons while the mass density 180-something. Pang! The loud noise of a blade's cry echoed in the heavenly world. A hint of light came from the blade's surface after Li Yunmu poured his great flux energy into it. Li Yunmu poured 2,000 points of his great flux energy before stopping to wait for the cold thunder blade. No, it was more accurate to say that he was waiting for the cold thunder blade into which little Ching had morphed to adapt to his great flux energy strength. He then slowly poured in more great flux energy and increased it to 3,000. Finally, when Li Yunmu increased the amount of great flux energy to 3,000, little Ching sent a signal that she was close to her limit. Little Ching had just entered the giant beast grade and was still far from entering the great circle of giant beast realm. After she morphed into a blade, the great flux energy which she could stomach amounted to 3,000 points. It wasn't Li Yunmu's uppermost limit, but it already surpassed his imagination. It has to be known that based on the system's assessment of the strength of human powerhouses, 3,000 units of great flux energy was almost equivalent to the strength of a great flux expert who was close to entering the sage realm. This was the reason why Li Yunmu could kill great flux experts as if they were chicken by relying on the substantial increase in strength he had obtained from his innate expert armor. It was all due to the enormous disparity in strength. Great, really great. With little Ching as a blade, even if I encounter a mid-stage sage flux expert, I'll be able to give them a run for their money. Although little Ching couldn't endure all of Li Yunmu's strength, she was much better than the original Cold Thunder Blade which could barely endure 200 points of his great flux energy. If Li Yunmu unleashed Violent Blade with great flux energy of 3,000 infused into the blade, he was confident that he could challenge a mid-stage sage flux expert and not be barely resisting them like before. After all, each strike of Violent Blade was more formidable than the last one. As long as Li Yunmu could stack more than 10 strikes, the strength of the skill would swell by several folds. The strength of this blade skill increased proportionally to the increase in his strength. As long as the amount of flux energy strength he infused into the blade was higher, the power displayed by Violent Blade would also increase greatly. This skill wasn't something that he would abandon once he grew stronger just because it was too low level for him. Li Yunmu had to admit that obtaining the Cyan Feathered Great Snake's egg complemented his offensive strength. Unlike before, when he became a lot more powerful after obtaining Azure Dragon Expert Armor, he no longer needed to rely only on his defense. The days when he needed to focus solely on defending with his innate expert armor and formidable defensive cultivation methods to barely endure against mid-stage Sage Flux experts because he didn't possess any lethal attacks were finally over. Violent blade skill returned to the world, and with it came Li Yunmu's danger critical extinguisher too. It could finally be displayed with the cold thunder blade in which little Ching had morphed. When Li Yunmu realized that he now possessed the combat strength to battle against a mid-stage Sage Flux expert of the origin world, he decided that it was time he scheduled his return trip to Earth. From now on, you will be called Divine Cyan Sword. Li Yunmu was deeply moved and gave a more suitable name to the cold thunder blade in which little Ching had morphed. Chapter 545, Retreating from the Precipice. The next day at dawn, Li Yunmu packed his things and quietly left Pangu City. After coming out of the seclusion from the heavenly world, he made some discreet inquiries about the events after the auction. Wang Ren informed him that the Pangu true armor had been obtained by the young sound woman. It was harder to learn about the reason why the trifling heavenly cats had surprisingly dispatched 3 sage cats without any hesitation and even joined hands with devil pythons to assassinate the young sound woman. Even if Wang Ren had a special position in Pangu City, he was still an ordinary person and couldn't know about the hidden motives behind the strange matter in the auction. He could only obtain that information from rumors flying all through the city. It was said that the young sound woman was the focus of the Dark Union. As for what was the Dark Union exactly? Neither Li Yunmu nor Wang Ren knew much about this. Li Yunmu could only find a little information in the system's comprehensive database. The Dark Union didn't refer toward some particular life form, but the members from any of the alien races which had been exiled or banished for following the dark path. It was a union established by those people. Their objective was said to be the overthrow of the people ruling the origin world and the destruction of the alliance of powers who governed over everyone. The Dark Union wanted to replace them at the top. The main members of this organization harbored this thought in their hearts and were traitors with great ambitions. However, everyone else simply called them degenerates. The Dark Union actually accepted the degenerates from all alien races. The organization was quite loose, but it still brought many ambitious and formidable people under one umbrella. Some of them were powerhouses who'd never accepted the restrictions and rules of the origin world. They did as they pleased since they possessed extremely formidable strength. Because of that, the Dark Union was able to hold on for a long time even while facing the joint attacks of every formidable race in the origin world. With time, it was only becoming more formidable and undisciplined. The Dark Union was probably among the very few powers which could be considered as surpassing the first tier. But whatever those people called themselves, the Dark Union or degenerates, it didn't mean anything to Li Yunmu for the time being. None of it had any relation to him. After all, his only thought right then was to finish his arrangements and return to Earth to eliminate God Undercurrent. This had been like a sore point in his heart for a long time. But before that, he still had to make a trip back to Black Spirit Valley. This was because he had to absorb and fuse the Black Spirit world into his innate expert armor so that it could evolve. His previous plan had been very good, but plans couldn't always keep up with the changes. The miscalculation in regards to Pangu True Armor's price was enough to make Li Yunmu accept the disparity between his strength and that of the higher class characters in the origin world. Thus, when he went back to Black Spirit Valley, he moved extremely quietly and low-key. At night, he quickly traversed the terrain while sitting on his cyan-feathered giant snake. While saddled on little Ching for a day and a night, he saved a lot of time. If he'd had to hurry over by himself, he wouldn't have been able to complete the journey in such a short time even if he could fly with the help of Azure Dragon Expert Armor. He had to admit that possessing a giant beast-grade combat pet was very troublesome. In order to defend it from the eyes of others, Li Yunmu had to take the longer route so as to avoid the gathering points in the wilderness or places where transfer channels were established. He was quite confident though that as long as he didn't use any transfer channels and wasn't recorded as traveling, he would evade the Origin God Sect and Underworld Serpent as well as any other power of the Origin world that might wish to track him. He was well aware that regardless of how enormous those powers were or how many regions their feelers covered, the origin world was simply too vast. No power or person could truly control every corner of the world. Even if they were a deity, it would still be impossible. Furthermore, even if they learned of his location, he had means to quietly slip away before they could reach him. Li Yunmu's avoidance of all human habitats and resolution to only travel through wilderness caused a major headache to all the powers trying to chase him. But his heart still wasn't at peace. He had a strong feeling that there was a good chance that some sort of trap would be waiting for him at the Black Spirit Valley. Whether he would return to Black Spirit Valley or not, no one knew the answer to this. But if Li Yunmu was in their place, he would guess that the assassin wouldn't be able to abandon the enormous treasure that was the Black Spirit Valley and avoid the place eternally. Thus, he was quite certain that his enemies who wanted to capture him were guarding the tree stumps and waiting for their rabbit. Sure enough, the closer Li Yunmu got to Black Spirit Valley, the fiercer his senses began to tingle. The sense of insecurity and crisis clouded his mind, forcing him to halt in his tracks. I cannot move forward. The feeling that as long as I enter 100-kilometer radius I would definitely perish is just too strong. Li Yunmu reined in the great snake little Ching and stopped with gloominess covering his face. Fortunately, he had experienced the failed assassination at the Pangu auction, which had allowed him to experience the true disparity between him and the powerful people of the origin world. Otherwise, if he hadn't gotten the wake-up call, then given the substantial increase in his strength after he had congealed the innate expert armor, he would have disregarded everything and recklessly entered Black Spirit Valley. He couldn't be considered as weak. Most people would count him among the origin world's powerhouses, since his strength was sufficient for him to battle against a mid-stage Sage Flux expert. However, the events at Pangu auction had made him realize the terrifying strength of an absolute Pangu powerhouse, which was a great circle Pangu sage. The little bit of arrogance which had taken bud in Li Yunmu's heart had been nipped at the budding stage. I can't go forward. The plan needs to be changed. Li Yunmu made a prompt decision and glanced at the mountain in front of him. Black Spirit Valley was right behind it. His single glance made him shiver, and he immediately commanded little Ching to turn in another direction. He was decisive, but not formidable enough. As he continuously retreated, he silently pondered. What Pangu true armor or absorbing of the Black Spirit world? If he could have done that, he would have become more formidable, but he couldn't accomplish it. It was the only way for him to remain alive. One day, I will kill my way back. Li Yunmu was unwilling, but he still retreated step by step. Chapter 546, Seeing Yu and Ruyan Lanzhi once more. In an unremarkable private residence in Whale City which served as home for the branch of underground serpent, a black-clothed, purple-eyed youth lightly cast open a window, releasing the devil hawk which had flown in just a moment ago. Without turning his head around, he said with a gloomy sigh, the mission has failed again. Why? Has something unexpected happened again? Uncreased her brows. She felt that the bad news had come to confirm the guess which she hadn't found greatly convincing previously. Given the strength of the chess piece, it wasn't possible for it to repeatedly escape from the chase of underground serpent. But, it was already the fourth time that they had failed to catch him. With this, gained proof that during the time the chess piece had infiltrated the origin god sect, its strength had undergone a heaven-defying transformation. However, what sort of opportunity had the chess piece encountered in the origin god sect that could rise the strength of a flux expert who hadn't even reached the Great Circle to such a terrifying level in a short time? Although it wasn't like these kind of things didn't happen in the origin world, there were very few people, less than 1 in millions and millions, who would encounter such an opportunity. For a while, continued to ponder over the matter. A hint of coldness flashed past the sharp face of the purple-eyed youth, and his expression became even more grave. The Earth Devil has sent a lot of information. Reportedly, after the chess piece got close to Black Spirit Valley, he seemed to have sensed the danger and disappeared without leaving any tracks. Moreover, the number of people who have interest in our chess piece is very large. And couldn't help but raise her voice in astonishment. Many. Yes, based on the investigation conducted by the arbitrator members belonging to the alliance of the local powers, the prime suspect is precisely our chess piece. There is another power, which is suspected to be a front for the Origin God sect. Its strength isn't too bad as a whole. It has a number of high-level cultivators, and the person leading them is an initial stage sage flux expert. There is a third power as well. However, our underworld serpent has been unable to investigate its origin for the time being. This power has the smallest number of people, but their strength is quite deep and immeasurable. I truly didn't think that a trifling chess piece would surprisingly attract so many complicated powers, the purple-eyed youth said while fidgeting. This is not good. After racking our brains, we had finally found an opportunity to infiltrate the Origin God sect, and this happened. We must get into contact with Li Yunmu. Regardless of his reasons for which he doesn't want to contact us anymore, we must learn the secret of the Origin God sect. I have a bad premonition that we have probably greatly underestimated it. I wonder whether the organization's insistence on destroying the Origin God sect will bring us good fortune or disaster. Then do you have some way to establish contact with the chess piece? A flash of impatience flashed through the eyes of the purple-eyed youth. I have a method. I didn't want to use this if I had an alternative, but facing this situation, we can only use such an inferior method to bring him to us. Anne's face turned slightly dark. She had no choice but to use that method to learn the secret of Origin God sect. After all, the only chess piece which had been able to successfully infiltrate Origin God sect and return was Li Yunmu. Although her actions would turn them into enemies, making the young powerhouse with seemingly tremendous potential become hostile toward them, she had no choice but to proceed with her plan. Uncle Zhong. An was a decisive person. She quickly made her decision and lightly called out toward the corner of the room. The old servant is here. Under the incredulous gaze of the purple-eyed youth, a black-clothed elder suddenly appeared behind the woman. I'll have to trouble you to make a trip. You must capture and bring him back to the organization before other powers can interfere, and respectfully said to the black-clothed elder. Be at ease, young miss. This old servant will quickly take care of this matter. The black-clothed elder rose from his position, and the next instant, his figure changed into black smoke which floated out of the residence. When the black-clothed elder left, the purple-eyed youth couldn't remain calm and asked loudly in confusion, he is just a trifling chess piece. As long as I personally made a trip, it would be enough. Yet you surprisingly asked Uncle Zhong to take action. Why? You don't understand? Because it is highly probable that this person who was originally a trifling chess piece has jumped out of the board all of a sudden. I am afraid that even you wouldn't be able to control the situation now. Like this, we can take both paths and can hope for one to succeed. At that time, Li Yunmu didn't know that because of his keen intuition toward danger, he had again avoided the disaster of being captured by a number of competing powers. His action had even prompted An to utilize what was classified as the most formidable power under her command. He had already reached southern regions Lanlu. If he hadn't remembered wrong, then Hai Yu, Ruyan Lanzhi and S.H.A.D.W had given this as their destination when they left. As a matter of fact, after he had unexpectedly encountered S.H.A.D.W at Profound South Sect last time, he had again established a faint connection with the three women. The reason why he came to the southern regions Lanlu was precisely to settle the matter which they had agreed upon at that time. After his plans regarding the Pangu true armor and absorbing the Black Spirit world had failed, he didn't waste time on the other insignificant problems. He remembered that he should make preparations to return to Earth. Since he had become the target of many powers, his best course of action was to disappear from the origin world. He didn't believe that the powers who were hunting him down would be willing to squander a tremendous amount of resources just to monitor him all the time. After all, his strength had reached a terrifying stage. If they wanted to deal with him, it wouldn't be as simple as dispatching a squad of cultivators possessing trash strength. A price had to be paid to deal with him, and it would be astronomical. After 2 months, Li Yunmu finally entered southern regions Lanlu like a solitary drifter. Lanlu wasn't a single power in a traditional sense, but rather a group of 32nd-tier powers allied together to form a tyrant. It was like an enormous monster which occupied the northwest side of the southern region of origin world and rejected any foreign first-tier powers that wanted to enter the region. It was a united and extremely xenophobic power that could even be considered somewhat more formidable than the traditional first-tier powers. Thus, the majority of locals and others viewed the southern region's Lanlu as an alliance, but even more so as a country formed from the alliance of numerous second-tier powers for the benefit of one community. Their country had a parliament formed by the 32nd-tier powers. It wielded the power in the northwest of the southern region. Several days after Li Yunmu stepped foot into the country, he gained a bit of understanding through the information collected secretly about Lanlu of southern region which Ruyan, Lanzhi, and S.H.A.D.W had decided to enter. This made the situation quite convenient for him. Ruyan, Lanzhi, I hadn't expected that 3 years would pass in a blink of an eye before we would see each other again. Li Yunmu raised his head and gazed toward the snow mountain not far from him. He looked at its summit where 3 slender women stood listening to his softly spoken words. S.H.A.D.W truly hadn't failed his expectations. They had appeared as agreed. Chapter 547, To Believe or Not. When Li Yunmu unhurriedly climbed over the peak of the snow mountain in front of him, Ruyan, Lanzhi, and S.H.A.D.W also walked over. Ruyan looked at him with a complicated gaze and greeted, Li Yunmu, long time no see. As for S.H.A.D.W, she didn't show much of a reaction. After all, she had already seen and made contact with Li Yunmu at the profound South sect not long ago. As for Ruyan Lanzhi, she didn't say anything. Like a spectator, she kept calmly watching while standing on the side. The matter which you told S.H.A.D.W, is it true? Although after coming to the origin world I have learned about the existence of ancient gods, I still feel that we are extremely far from coming in contact with such existences. Ruyan's expression changed, and her tone also became more serious. It's correct. The matter is related to our homeland. I don't need to conceal it from you. As a matter of fact, I fear that when we rushed to descend to the origin world through the Black Dragon Island, it was probably the reason the ancient god came to our home. Naturally, this is just my personal conjunction. After the 2 people met again, they didn't bother wasting time on unnecessary talks and directly jumped to the main topic. Li Yunmu's reason to come to the southern region's Lanlu was precisely to find Ruyan and was an outcome of his careful deliberations. After all, he was in a situation in which plans couldn't keep up with the changes. Originally, he had intended to look for the descenders of his Earth personally and eliminate the dangerous elements one by one, but it had become unlikely that he could accomplish that. After all, Li Yunmu wasn't an idiot. Previously, he had asked Underworld Serpent to investigate the position of all his descender companions. Now that he had parted ways with that organization, it was impossible for the enemy to not use this knowledge and make suitable arrangements. If Li Yunmu continued with the original plan to search for the descenders one by one, he would sooner or later certainly fall into an ambush arranged by Underworld Serpent. Although his strength had increased substantially, he still couldn't face a first-tier organization just by himself. Unfortunately, his plans to obtain the Pangu True Armor and absorb the Black Spirit World had failed. Otherwise, if his innate expert armor would have been able to reach perfection and advance to the divine grade, things would have been different. He would then have a lot of confidence in being able to confront even a terrifying character at the level of Great Circle Sage Flux Expert. Although divine grade innate expert armor could only amplify his flux energy strength by 30 times, which was only 1 time higher than his present innate expert armor, there could be no comparison between the two in terms of the formidable defense and unique properties. In the end, since he couldn't personally eliminate the dangerous characters one by one, he had decided to retreat and try to collaborate with the 3 women. Compared to Man Tian, Luo Tian, Ji Wuxin, Zi Hanbei, and the others with their wild ambitions, S.H.A.D.O.W, and even Ruyan Lanzhi took the big picture into consideration. They didn't possess excessive ambitions. Li Yunmu wanted them to send out the invitation under their name for all the descenders of Earth to gather. Until that time, he would remain hidden in the shadows and catch them all in one swoop. This was the only method which could save him both time and effort. S.H.A.D.O.W glanced at Li Yunmu and explained what they'd done. We have already sent out the message urgently asking for help. But only 9 of our Earth's descenders have replied and are hurrying at the fastest speed. We used the excuse of a threat of descenders from other planes to ask them to gather. I estimate that it will take around 2 months for them to arrive here. Although he couldn't understand it, Li Yunmu had always felt that S.H.A.D.O.W had great confidence in him for some reason. He hadn't expected that after their previous exchange, she would have already completed this matter. Hearing this, Li Yunmu breathed a sigh of relief. He thought for a moment, then said, "This is also good. For now, I will hide in Lanlu. Once everyone arrives, we will meet again. Remember, don't leak my whereabouts to anyone else or you will be inviting great trouble for yourself." He then said his farewells to the 3 women. As a matter of fact, he was forced to trust the 3 because of his current situation. If any of them pulled a dirty trick on him, he would abandon all of their homeland. After all, he alone wasn't responsible from obstructing God Undercurrent from regaining his strength. All the descenders of the 55th Earth were responsible for that. If it wasn't for the fact that he had been the first in finding a way to return to Earth, then he probably wouldn't have been the one jump out and take the banner. Suddenly, Ruyan Lanzhi, who had been playing spectator the entire time, called out to Li Yunmu. "Wait a moment. Of the 11 descenders, only 9 have replied. Aren't you afraid that the other 2 might have met with some accident? Nothing unexpected has happened. The number of people replying is fully in accordance with my expectations. If I didn't guess wrong, then the people who haven't replied are Zhanhua and Blade Devil." Without turning his head, Li Yunmu added, "I've already killed Zhanhua." As for Blade Devil, he had never expected him to reply. From the first moment he laid eyes on Blade Devil, he had become aware of that person's strong desire to work alone. Perhaps, all the members of the Transcending Power Blood would only had the world of their blade in their eyes and didn't care about Earth's fate in the least. Moreover, Blade Devil was the only person among the descenders who hadn't joined a faction and also the only one whom Li Yunmu couldn't see through. Given his cultivation speed, Li Yunmu wasn't the least bit worried that the other party would have remained at Flux Expert Realm until then. Since it was extremely possible that he had already congealed Flux Expert armor, Li Yunmu wasn't the least bit anxious that Blade Devil would be captured by God Undercurrent. What? Once the 3 women heard his reply, they were stunned. His words had caught them completely off guard since they knew that Zhanhua was the most powerful successor disciple of War God Temple. Yet such an important character had already perished, so how could they not be stunned? "Why did you kill him? You should be aware that although the descenders of our world have their own personal ambitions, we act united in front of outsiders. After all, there are many descenders from the other 65 planes besides us." Yu took a deep breath, finding it difficult to digest the information. It wasn't without reason. "I did it only because he couldn't control his ambitions and colluded with a demonic deity to open the passage to return to Earth before others. He would have unleashed that demonic deity on our homeland. Such a thing crossed my bottom line many times over." Li Yunmu didn't stop for long and quickly jumped down the snow mountain, moving further and further away from the group. Before all the descenders assembled, he didn't plan to reveal himself so as not to give any opportunity for others to capture him. The more he learned about the powers of the origin world, the more cautious he grew. He was more than certain that before he could disregard a genuine Great Circle Sage Flux expert of the origin world, he had to carefully hide himself. When Li Yunmu gradually disappeared in the distance, Yu, S.H.A.D.O.W, and Ruyan Lanzhi exchanged a glance with each other. Li Yunmu's arrival had caused the three of them to become extra serious. Yu gazed towards Li Yunmu's disappearing figure and mumbled absent-mindedly, "What do you think? The information brought by him, is it true? It should be true. Moreover, if an ancient god really went down to our earth, then the only person we can trust is him. At least he has already come before us." Compared to Yu's hesitation, S.H.A.D.W displayed complete trust and spoke with a slight smile. Chapter 548, Bound to be Extraordinary. The western boundary of Lanzhi was one of the countless snow-covered mountains in the territory of Flying Snow Mountain. After bidding his farewell to Yu and the other two women, Li Yunmu quietly hid himself in an unremarkable mountain in the Flying Snow Mountain range. No one in the sect would know that he was hiding in its territory since he had fooled the warning system of their sect protecting Great Spell. The reason why Li Yunmu had been able to infiltrate S.H.A.D.W's sect so easily was only one, and its name was Little Ching. She possessed the bloodline of an ancient devil beast and had the innate divine ability to morph. It, of course, was not as simple as it sounded. Otherwise, it wouldn't be considered as a divine ability but just a low-grade one. Li Yunmu had exploited Little Ching's morphing ability and imitated the presence emitted by S.H.A.D.W as well as the identification machinations unique to Flying Snow Mountain. With that, he had been able to sneak in without much trouble. At that moment, he was sitting quietly against a wall in a cave on an unremarkable mountain. Before long, an extremely elegant female returned from outside and reported in front of him. "Master, I have gained an approximate understanding of their current circumstances." Once Li Qinghong returned to the mountain, her body shook and flashed once. A cyan light fell from her clothes and in a blink, it transformed into a cyan-colored little snake which scuttled to Li Yunmu's arm. Little Ching's morphing ability had allowed her to walk freely through Lanzhi for the past few days without anyone in this enormous alliance discovering that she was a foreigner. "Oh, do tell then," Li Yunmu said without moving from his position. Ruyan Lanzhi is affiliated with a power called Red Smoke Valley. Based on its comprehensive strength, Red Smoke Valley is ranked in the 11th position among the 32nd tier powers. 3 months ago, she had opened all the 105 cultivation points at an astonishing speed and was promoted to a core disciple. Furthermore, she was also accepted as a legacy disciple by a sage flux expert elder. A month ago, she congealed her flux expert armor with resources far surpassing that of ordinary core disciples and advanced to the great flux expert realm. The expert armor she congealed should be treasure armor, and her present cultivation should be at the 2nd rank. Her position and strength among the young generation of Red Smoke Valley is second only to the legacy disciple Hong Chen of the Valley Master. S.H.A.D.W belongs to the Flying Snow Mountain sect which ranks at the 7th position. More than a year ago, the sect master of the Flying Snow Mountain sect made an exception because of unknown reasons and accepted her as a 3rd successor disciple. Her present strength is unknown, but based on the information gathered by this subordinate in the past few days, she is yet to advance to Great Flux Expert realm. It is extremely possible that she is attacking the final 3 flux points to reach the Great Circle, so her cultivation has come to a halt. S.H.A.D.W's status in the Flying Snow Mountain sect is rumored to be above the other 2 successor disciples. It is also said that the title of the heir of Flying Snow Mountain sect would also fall on her. As for Yu, when Li Qinghong mentioned Yu's name, her expression turned complex. "What about Yu?" Li Yunmu slightly raised his head. Compared to the success of Ruyan Lanzhi and S.H.A.D.W, Yu's current accomplishments are even higher. She belongs to the most formidable power of the alliance, Orchid Lake. By now, she has already been confirmed as the next leader of this power. Moreover, it is also rumored that half a year ago, she had battled against several 3rd-ranked Great Flux experts of the same sect on her own. Her present strength is even more deep and immeasurable. 1 month ago, Lanzhi Parliament even announced that she had been chosen as one of the candidates who could become the next ruler. Because Yu receives secret protection from the Lanzhi Parliament even at the Orchid Lake, no detailed investigation could be conducted. However, I suspect that she had also congealed innate expert armor. Once Li Qinghong finished speaking, her complexion turned unsightly. Clearly, Hai-Yu's astonishing accomplishments and tremendous increase in strength in less than 3 years had given a psychological blow to her. Some people were inevitably bound to be extraordinary. Hai-Yu had been like that on Earth, and even after descending to the more powerful origin world, her background and accomplishments ensured that she would become a dazzling star. Innate expert armor. Li Yunmu hissed through his teeth before taking in a deep breath. Li Qinghong's personal conjunction was most likely correct. Only the fact that Hai-Yu congealed an innate expert armor could explain how she could battle against several third-rank Great Flux experts as early as half a year ago. Also, her congealment of innate expert armor was the only explanation why she had been chosen as the successor for the Orchid Lake and even included in the list of candidates for rulers by the Lanzhi Parliament. All of that could only be accomplished with innate expert armor. But there was one question: where could she have gotten the resources to congeal the legendary innate expert armor? It has to be known that only one in millions and millions of cultivators encountered such an opportunity. Even if Hai-Yu was the holy daughter of the evolved humans, wasn't it a bit too outrageous? After all, Li Yunmu had received the seeds of world ancestor while also possessing the Black Devil King armor, Snake Goddess Scale, 3 parts of Azure Dragon Supreme Battlesuit and so on. All of them were supreme treasures. If he had lacked any one of them, it would have been difficult for him to congeal the innate expert armor. Li Yunmu was greatly surprised. But despite that, he didn't feel that the news brought by Li Qinghong were a threat to him. Even if Hai-Yu had congealed innate expert armor, he didn't fear it in the least. After all, not everyone possessed Meridian Nurturing Flux Point technique, which allowed their flux energy strength to surpass the universal limit of flux experts. Similarly, ownership of innate expert armor didn't mean that the person's flux energy strength would be amplified 29 times, which was extremely close to the amplification provided by the divine grade innate expert armor. Thus, after receiving all the news, Li Yunmu was still able to maintain his calm. Only his suspicions had grown. Hai-Yu, what exactly had she relied upon to condense the innate expert armor? Even if the sea gods' people had supplied her with the greatest treasures on earth, they were talking about innate expert armor. The requirements for congealing it were extremely harsh, so how could she congeal it by just relying on some precious treasures? Master, I can think of one possibility. Li Qinghong suddenly said with surprise in her own voice. What is it? Which deity suit? Li Qinghong said while emphasizing on each word. Chapter 549, Integrating Comprehended Skills. Which supreme battlesuit? Li Yunmu cried out in alarm. The 5 supreme battlesuits on Earth were Azure Dragon Deity Suit, Barbarian Battle Deity Suit, Witch Deity Suit, Hegemonic Deity Suit, and Dual Star Deity Suit. Since which supreme battlesuit had silently fallen into the hands of the evolved humans, it could be foreseen that Hai-Yu could rely on it to congeal innate expert armor. Still, she would have to possess at least 4 or maybe even all 5 parts to do it. Otherwise, the mystery of the resources used by Hai-Yu to congeal HR innate expert armor couldn't be solved. Li Yunmu had been completely unprepared for this information that Li Qinghong had brought to him after her investigation. He believed that Hai-Yu's group of 3 women took the big picture into consideration more than Man Tian and the others, and their ambitions also weren't very great. This fact was clearly illustrated by Ruyan Lanzhi opening only 105 flux points and then deciding to advance to Great Flux Expert Realm. It was clear that this woman had renounced her family's right to fight for control of Earth. However, the relationship between Li Yunmu and them hadn't yet reached the stage of absolute trust. It seems that the gathering of descenders after 2 months won't be as simple as I'd hoped. The unexpected event of Hai-Yu congealing the innate expert armor was sufficient to give a warning to Li Yunmu. Since it was their final moment before return, he didn't want all his hard work to be useless at the final juncture. Suddenly, a hint of decisiveness shone in his eyes. Perhaps at that moment he ought to make a choice between long-term and short-term goals. At that thought, a hint of firmness appeared on his face. All right, there are still 2 months left. I hope that I am not too late. During this time, you mustn't leave the snow mountain. There's no need to monitor their movements. I need to enter seclusion. Light flashed past Li Yunmu's eyes when he told Li Qinghong to stop monitoring the 3 women. When all was said and done, the way the situation would develop would depend only on his personal strength. If he possessed absolute strength, all the unexpected accidents or external forces would become meaningless. With that thought, Li Yunmu entered seclusion, sealing himself off from the outside world. Sisson, list out my personal information. After making the decision, Li Yunmu didn't hesitate, and the next instant, his personal profile appeared in his consciousness sea. System, 7th level. Host, Li Yunmu. Shadows, 12. Experience point, 396 million. Ability points, 278 million. Space elements, 1008. Comprehension points, 0. Heavenly world, 2 sun. Cultivation, 1st rank Great Flux Expert. Flux energy strength 903. Physical strength 1500. Bloodline, Great Sun Flood God Bloodline. Comprehended foundational skills, Arrow Evasion Step, Great Heights, Cricket Cut Kick, Extraordinary Sage, Charged Assault, Extraordinary Sage, Repeated Chops, Extraordinary Sage, Repeated Leap Chops, Extraordinary Sage, Violent Blade, Excellence, Insect Step, Great Heights, Fist Skills, Extraordinary Sage, Tyrannical Cross-Shaped Arms, Extraordinary Sage, Tyrant Fist Skill, Extraordinary Sage, Flash Step, Integration, Kicking Technique, Extraordinary Sage, Repeated Kicks. Extraordinary Sage, Thunderous Heavy Kick, Excellence, Basic Archery Technique, Extraordinary Sage, Heavy Archery, Extraordinary Sage, Blind Shot, Integration, 3-Party Origin Arrow, Reaching Perfection, Absolute Defense Tyrant Boxing, Reaching Perfection, Violent Blade Tyrant Heavenly Chop, Experience Makes Progress, Unique Shadow Heavenly Blade, Small Success, Shadow Carapace, Integration. Cultivation Methods, Aurora Killing Justice, Chao Tian 8 Steps, Great Sun Secret Technique, Wing God Tornado Kick, Spirit Pincer Steps, Spirit Pincer Ripping Technique, Ghostly Image Substitution, Ghostly Evasion, Ghost King's Body Refining Secrets, Devil Soul Refinement, Ghost Inheritance, Plant Essence Innate Healing Reversal. Body Refining Techniques, Admiralty Cover, Devil Dragon Bone Refining Secrets, Cross Cover Armor, Great Sun Thunder Tyrant Body Muscle Marrow Secrets. Special Cultivation Methods, Meridian Nurturing Flux Point Technique, Infant Soul Preservation. Instant Killing Technique, Danger Critical Strike, Extinguisher. Even Li Yunmu himself hadn't realized that the number of his foundational skills and cultivations methods had already risen this high. Among them, there were some which he had comprehended and cultivated a long time ago when he was on Earth. But there were also some which he had comprehended or fortunately obtained after coming to the origin world. Li Yunmu hadn't once arranged the complicated cultivation methods and skills which he possessed. In the 3 years after descending, he had been focused on opening flux points and achieving a quick breakthrough in cultivation. By then though, he had finally reached the Great Circle and opened all the 108 flux points. Furthermore, he had congealed the most formidable type of innate expert armor and entered the ranks of Great Flux Experts. If he wanted to advance his cultivation to the next stage, it was clearly more difficult and would be extremely slow. After all, once he reached the Great Flux Expert realm, then unless he possessed a systematic cultivation method of a first-tier power, his desire to increase his cultivation to the 10th rank Great Flux Expert would be extremely difficult to achieve. With this being the case, he could only focus his attention on the skills which he had comprehended independently or perhaps increase his cultivation of the various techniques. Although his cultivation couldn't rise to the next level in a short time, cultivation wasn't the only thing that represented battle prowess. Before Li Yunmu had seen it, he hadn't been aware. But once he saw his personal profile, he was extremely stunned. He had been releasing the 12 shadows to sneak into the wilderness to continue hacking, and the number of his experience and ability points had surprisingly reached a few hundred millions. Originally, he didn't plan to use his experience and ability points right away. He wanted to wait until the system upgraded to the 10th level so he could use the accumulated points to exchange for an even higher-end energy unit. He remembered that the system had previously divulged that he could currently only utilize 2 types of energy units, so he would need to exchange for an even higher grade energy unit to increase the cultivation of techniques which were classified as deity-level cultivation methods. But clearly, he couldn't wait for such a long time, so he decided to use the point which he had accumulated for a long time to increase his strength. The next instant, his gaze fell upon another icon above all the comprehended skills. While hacking during the past few years, the shadows had comprehended many new skills above the foundation skills which he had comprehended in the past. His proficiency in them ranked from low to high in ascending order as follows: basic comprehension, small success, experience makes progress easy, integrating and linking, reaching perfection, outstanding, excellence, great heights, extraordinary sage. Altogether, there were 9 grades. Based on it was clear that when his proficiency reached the 9th grade, extraordinary sage, it represented that he had reached the limit of the foundational skill. However, when Li Yunmu focused his attention of the various skills in that list, he noticed some changes that came when the system had recently upgraded to the 7th level. And those changes included 3 new abilities. The first was forgetting comprehended skills, the second was fusing comprehended skills, and the third was breaking through comprehended skills. Chapter 550, 1 out of 100. The system had upgraded to the 7th level because Li Yunmu had accidentally cleared some unknown condition. With it, the system had finally advanced to the 7th level after remaining at the 6th level for a long time. Clearly, the 3 functions above the skills should be the new changes which had come from the latest upgrade. The first function was forgetting comprehended skills. After close inspection, he found this function was exactly as the name implied. It assisted the host in forgetting the surplus useless or not important skills. This would clear up the long list in his arsenal, so when the shadows were killing monsters, they wouldn't be slowed down by an excessive amount of foundational skills. With that, the proficiency of the necessary skills would increase much quicker. Naturally, this forgetting function wasn't without its merits. If he chose to forget some comprehended skills, their proficiency would be converted to comprehension points based on their grade. The second function was to fuse comprehended skills, and it was even easier to explain. He needed to choose at least 2 skills from the pile of comprehended skills, and as long as they fulfilled the criteria, they could be fused to create a new skill. Naturally, whether the new skill was stronger or weaker compared to the original ones could only be determined after Li Yunmu tested it out. The third function was breakthrough. After a simple glance, Li Yunmu discovered that not every comprehended skill could have a breakthrough. There were 2 conditions which needed to be fulfilled for it to be possible. First, the proficiency level of the comprehended skill had to reach the highest 9th level, extraordinary sage. Only then could it make a breakthrough to the next stage, which naturally implied a qualitative transformation. The second condition was enough comprehension points. Where did they come from? They were the compensation for forgotten skills. Li Yunmu carefully researched the 3 functions for a long while before finally deciding to act. He chose to forget the skills which were completely unusable or didn't have much of an impact at his current cultivation. After making the plan in his mind, he commanded the system, I choose charged assault, heavy chop, heavy leap strike, violent blade, these 4 skills to forget. The reason why Li Yunmu chose these 4 skills was very simple, because violent blade heavy leap strike was the skill learned by the system from the combination of the 4. Thus, he didn't need the superfluous charged assault, heavy chop, heavy leap strike. Even Violent Blade was the same. It wasn't that Violent Blade, which had enormous potential, wasn't important to him, but that as long as he had Violent Blade Heavy Leap Strike, he still had the knowledge of the above 4 skills. Because of that, as long as he forgot them, then when shadows single-mindedly focused on hacking, they would only use the Violent Blade Heavy Leap Strike. This would increase the proficiency of the combined skill. Host has chosen to forget Charged Assault, Heavy Chop, Heavy Leap Strike, and Violent Blade. The system asks the host to confirm his choice once again. If you choose to confirm, there would be no way to restore the forgotten skills, the system aptly reminded him. Yes. Following Li Yunmu's reconfirmation, Charged Assault, Heavy Chop, Heavy Leap Strike, Violent Blade instantly disappeared from the panel of his foundational skills. A series of the system's notifications followed right after. Ding! Charged Assault, which you've chosen to forget, is a D grade skill, proficiency of extraordinary sage, so you obtain 1000 contribution points. Ding! You've chosen to forget Heavy Chop, because it is a D grade comprehension skill with the proficiency of extraordinary sage, you have obtained 1000 comprehension points. Ding! You've chosen to forget Heavy Leap Strike. Because of it being a C grade comprehension skill with a proficiency of extraordinary sage, you have obtained 10,000 comprehension points. Ding! You've chosen to forget Violent Blade. Because it is a B grade skill with proficiency of excellence, you have obtained 70,000 comprehension points. A series of notifications flashed, resulting the new stat comprehension points instantly raising to 82,000 from 0. After read-through messages, Li Yunmu instantly understood how the forgetting worked. The number of comprehension points returned depended upon the grade and proficiency of the foundational skill. Compared to Violent Blade, the skill which was B grade, Charged Assault, and the others had lower potential and didn't provide him with many comprehension points. The majority of comprehension points had been obtained from forgetting Violent Blade. After gaining a rough understanding of how everything worked, Li Yunmu continued to forget even more skills. Those who didn't possess sufficient strength or weren't required at his level he chose to forget one by one. Forgetting Fist Skill, forgetting Tyrant Fist Skill, forgetting Kick Skill, forgetting Cricket Cut Kick, forgetting Heavy Kick, forgetting Basic Archery Technique, forgetting Heavy Archery, forgetting Spear Foundation Technique, forgetting Rapid Spear Technique, forgetting Dual Blade Technique, and so on. Finally, after Li Yunmu had chosen to forget the majority of low-potential skills, the amount of comprehension points he collected rose to 1.78 million. Although the skills which he had chosen to forget included myriads of low-potential worthless foundational skills, there were just way too many of them. All of them had been instinctively comprehended by the 12 shadows while hacking monsters, and their numbers surpassed several hundreds, which had just been forgotten by Li Yunmu. In the end, there were only a little more than 10 foundational skills with high potential were left on the panel. Arrow Evasion, A grade crisis anticipating an evasion skill. Violent Blade Critical Leap Strike, A grade final combination skill. Tyrannical Cross-Shaped Arms, B grade arm resistance skill. Insect Step, A grade agility skill. Flash Step, A grade movement skill for eruption with speed. Absolute Defense Tyrant Boxing, A grade bombarding fist skill. Thunderous Pressure Kick, A grade high damage bombarding technique. Blind Shot, S grade excess distance sight archery technique. 3-part Origin Arrow, A grade tactical control archery technique. Violent Blade Tyrannical Heavenly Chop, A grade energy storing high damage blade skill. Unique Shadow Heavenly Blade Chop, S grade United Shadow Chop. Shadow Carapace, S grade Shadow life-saving technique. In an instant, the originally several hundred skills were cleared by Li Yunmu, leaving behind only 11 most formidable foundational skills. All of them were B grade and above, and the 3 skills with the highest potential were even S grade. After a careful observation, the majority of the skills comprehended by the shadows during their battle showed up to related to the skills Li Yunmu used personally. The highest number of skills among those he retained involved blades. They were followed by fist and kicking skills, and finally, there was archery and escaping techniques.